As the clock's hands crept toward the bottom of the dial, marking 9:30 in the evening of April 25th, 1973, Henry McDaniel and his beloved wife found themselves crossing the threshold back into their family home. They had just attended a town meeting and were still buzzing with the emotions and drama that these kind of things bring up. If anyone or anyone you know has ever attended like a town hall meeting, you know exactly the kind of conversations that they were having. You have to understand, Enfield, Illinois at that time was a very small town. In 1973, it only had about 750 residents. I think more people lived in the building that I grew up with in Brooklyn than did in that town. So the matters that were discussed at the town hall, well, they really mattered. The warm glow of their home was punctuated by the hurried, excited faces of their offspring, Lil and Henry, who were left home to fend for themselves during the hour or so their parents were gone. It was the 70s, times were different, cut them some slack. Their youthful eyes, usually sparkling with the innocent joy of seeing familiar faces, now held a different glint. You could almost see their hearts pounding in their chests, matching the rhythm of their quickened breaths. With an almost palpable sense of delight barely contained under the surface, they began to weave a tale so animated it would put any seasoned storyteller to shame. The event that they recounted had unfolded during the brief period when they found themselves alone. Their words tumbled out in hurried whispers and excited squeals, painting a picture so vivid it was as though one was living through it. They spoke of an unidentifiable being, an entity whose nature remained a mystery to them. This creature had apparently attempted to infiltrate their home, relentlessly assaulting their sturdy wooden door that stood between them and it. The image they portrayed was one of a beastly figure casting long, grotesque shadows under the moonlight, each scratch echoing through the silent house. Their descriptions were so detailed, you could almost hear the guttural growls escaping from this creature's throat as it desperately tried to get into their home. Now, such tales are often dismissed as mere products of an overactive imagination when coming from children. Fantastical creatures lurking in the shadows being a common thing of many youthful yarns. However, what followed next would make even the most hardened skeptic pause for a thought. I'm Christopher Feinstein, and this is Haunted American History. Now, just as Henry was on his way to dismiss his children's story as just another fabrication born out of their overactive imagination, a peculiar sound reached his ears. It was a noise that made him freeze in his tracks, made the hairs on his arms stand up, and it sent a chill up and down his back. The sound was eerily identical to the one that his offspring had just described, an unsettling, scraping noise that seemed to reverberate from the direction of the front door. Now, he tried to reason with what this could be. His mind began to whirl. Maybe it was the wind blowing a branch that was scraping against the side of the house. Or maybe it was a stray dog who was trying to get in from the cold outside. Or a cat. Cats are always up to something. Cats maybe run around. I know me personally, I have cats that run across my porch at night. So maybe that's what was happening here. With all these mundane possibilities in his mind, he steeled himself for just an ordinary encounter. But his heart was pounding, though. Each beat was echoing his growing worry as he ventured toward the source of this noise. So, he steeled himself and walked to his front door, reached for the doorknob, and yanked the door open, and finally came face to face with what was causing this disturbance. It wasn't anything as commonplace as a cat or a dog. Instead, it was something far more bizarre, more perplexing than anything his logical mind could have ever anticipated. It defied all reason and shattered his understanding of reality into fragments of disbelief. In the dead of night, with only the moon as the light, Henry stumbled upon a sight that would forever be etched into the marrow of his very bones. His heart throbbed violently against his ribcage as he laid eyes on an entity that seemed to have been crudely stitched together from the remnants of a science fiction nightmare. The creature was an aberration, possessing 3 gnarled legs that held up its grotesquely disproportionate body. Its torso was short and squat. It was almost comically so, if not for the terror that it invoked in Henry. It had 2 stubby arms, something like a T-Rex, dangling awkwardly from its sides. But what truly struck fear into Henry's heart were its eyes. 2 pink orbs that glowed with an eerie luminescence in the darkness, each one as large and bright as a high-powered flashlight. The monstrosity stood at the height of about 4.5 feet. It had grayish skin that seemed to blend into the shadow around it. And the worst thing of all was it was trying to get into his house. The sight of this creature was enough to send waves of revulsion coursing through him. Now, with a surge of adrenaline pumping through his veins, he slammed the door shut with a loud bang and bolted towards his trusty pistol. He picked up his gun, snatched up a flashlight, and with shaking hands, he returned to the door. He swung it open and took aim at the abomination from another world and pulled the trigger, not once, but 4 times. I would have emptied the clip, but... Now, according to him later, he said, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit it." The beast responded with a chilling hiss, one that reminded him eerily of a wildcat's growl, before bounding away across his yard with agility that he couldn't even compare to anything. Each leap it took covered an astonishing distance. According to McDaniel's estimate, it managed to cover 50 feet in just 3 bounces. As it disappeared into the darkness towards the end of his house, toward the railroad, Henry was left standing in his yard, stunned, out of breath. He took a moment to try and gather his thoughts before running back into the house and grabbing his phone to dial 911. The night had just begun for Henry, and he knew that he had a story to tell that absolutely no one would believe. The cops came, and in the course of their examination, the uniformed state troopers made a strange discovery. The exterior of the old weather-beaten house bore a series of peculiar markings. They weren't just random abrasions caused by weather or time. They were distinct, deep scratches, etched into the faded paint of his siding, as if a creature was clawing at it with desperate intensity. Adding to the mystery was a set of footprints scattered haphazardly around the vicinity. Now, at first glance, they bore a resemblance to those left behind by a large dog. But when you got closer and did a real inspection, one odd detail emerged that set them apart from any ordinary dog tracks. Each print was marked with 6 individual indentations where toes should be, 2 more than you would expect from your average household pet. Now, this strange anomaly gave an eerie and unnatural feel to these traces left behind by whatever creature had trespassed here. Among these prints were 2 distinctive ones that measured approximately 4 inches in width, equivalent to those left by a pretty sizable animal. Yet, there was another track that was noticeably smaller, suggesting that perhaps it had maybe a 3rd foot, or that perhaps there was another creature entirely with it. The ranks of the responding officers were riddled with disbelief. Now, despite this report that McDaniel had made about this savage creature and the proof that he was providing them by showing the claw marks in the walls and on his door, the footprints on his property, they weren't buying it. The police found themselves at an impasse. Their search for any real tangible evidence of this supposed beast yielded nothing but frustration and unanswered questions. The tension that had been sparked by McDaniel's claim seemed to dissipate in the face of their fruitless efforts. For now, things settled down into an uneasy calm. However, this quiet was not destined to last too long. In the early hours of May 6th, at approximately 3 a.m., when most people are asleep, nice, relax in the bed, Henry McDaniel found himself face to face with his nightmare once again. This time, he was stirred awake by not only his nightmares, but from a cacophony of distressed barks from his neighbor's dogs. They howled in terror against something unseen yet undoubtedly present. There was something in his yard, monstrous and lurking. Henry gathered his stuff, threw on a pair of pants, grabbed his gun and a flashlight, and ran out into his yard. He went to the edge of his property, all the way towards the back, close to the railroad tracks, and once more, he found himself face to face with this entity, as it lingered close to the rusted steel of the train tracks. The creature, who was just a silhouette against the moonlit backdrop, was an eerie sight, and he said that it held him in its spell. He watched as it meandered along the tracks, its movements unhurried and almost graceful. It was as if time itself had slowed down in this particular space. For several minutes, that to Henry felt like an eternity, McDaniel's eyes never left the creature. His gaze was riveted by its every movement. His mind was racing to comprehend what he was witnessing. He could see it clearly now. A figure in stark contrast against the darkened landscape. Its form was outlined by the faint glow of the distant streetlights. With his neighbor's dogs still losing their mind, the creature, not affected at all by the noise, just kind of seemed to lose interest. And with a casual spring in its step, it bounded away into the darkness of the night. Its departure was just as strange as its arrival. I mean, 1 minute it was there, and then the next minute it was just gone. In his own words, later recounted to anyone that would listen. I mean, I know me, I'd be outside with a bell, telling everybody within arm's reach of me what the hell just happened. But McDaniel said, I saw something moving out on those old railroad tracks, just standing there like it just belonged. I didn't take any shots at it or anything like that. It just started walking along those tracks without a care in the world. Me? I would have emptied the gun and probably thrown it afterwards. A shoe would have gotten thrown. Anything that was in my reach was getting hurled. News of what came to be known as the Enfield Horror soon would spread far and wide. Word traveled fast, and before long, curiosity seekers from all corners descended upon their small town. They came in droves, with hope gleaming in their eyes. Hope for a glimpse of this elusive creature that had turned their quiet little town into an epicenter of intrigue overnight. Me? I stay home. I've told stories before if I've heard things outside my house. And you know what I do? Just close the blind. If I don't see it, it doesn't see me. You mind your business, I'll mind mine. Thank you. The throngs of people that had gathered were a pulsating mass of excitement and curiosity. But for all their fervor, they were also an invasive presence on the town. Their boisterous chatter and intrusive investigations disturbed the tranquil peace of Enfield. This led to the town's sheriff, a stern man with a weathered face etched by years of maintaining law and order, to caution Henry McDaniel. He warned him in no uncertain terms to keep his tongue tethered, or else he would find himself behind bars. Keep your mouth shut, Henry. So as weeks morphed into months, the influx of people only swelled. Didn't seem like Henry listened. The once quiet streets now echoed with clamor and commotion as more and more curious souls flocked to Enfield. With this surge in population came a rising tide of anxiety among its original inhabitants, as you can imagine. I don't know what I would do if my streets were now just filled with strangers. They watched with growing unease as their peaceful haven transformed into a hubbub of chaos. Among all the newcomers were those who considered themselves bona fide monster hunters. Individuals armed with knowledge from countless hours spent studying cryptids or paranormal phenomena. Others were merely just thrill seekers, adrenaline junkies who were looking for their next fix, or just regular old hunters who were intrigued by the prospect of essentially bagging a monster. I mean, that's some big bragging rights. Their wide-eyed anticipation was palpable, but so was their recklessness. This escalating situation forced the sheriff's hand, particularly when he found himself having to slap cuffs on 5 overzealous hunters who had fired shots at an indistinct gray thing that was darting amongst the trees in the twilight. Now, the incident served as a reminder of how quickly fear and interest could turn into folly when fueled by ignorance and just unchecked excitement. In the midst of all the hunters, there were 2 men who stood out in particular: Mike Moggle and Roger Tappy. Both of them hailed from Elwood, Indiana, a place known for its quiet, not for its monster sightings. Yet here they were, their faces etched with a mix of fear and excitement, as they shared their own tale about the Enfield monster. They claimed to have seen what could only be described as a gray monkey, as they put it. I don't know why I did that. A creature that was fleetingly glimpsed as it darted through the tangled underbrush. Its hasty movements left them with little more than a flash of gray fur and an unsettling feeling that lingered long after the creature had vanished. The sheriff was less than thrilled with this newfound hysteria. As you can imagine, if your job was to uphold law and order, this is a nightmare. Now, he targeted his irritation at Henry McDaniel, who seemed to be the center of this strange occurrence. The sheriff's threats were numerous and harsh, yet they fell on deaf ears. McDaniel remained unshaken in his conviction. He knew something unnatural was unfolding in their peaceful town. As time passed, the initial flurry of hunters and tourists began to wane. The once bustling scene grew quieter. However, this was short-lived. 4 more people then stepped forward claiming to have witnessed the elusive Enfield Horror. Their accounts echoed those before them, fleeting glimpses of something gray and indescribable moving swiftly through brush. Their description varied slightly, but all agreed on one thing: there was something very strange going on. After all the commotion and hubbub, things kind of calmed down, and then eventually, silence fell over Enfield once again. The monster was gone, and it was all over. But you can't help but wonder if it's just merely a calm before another storm. Perhaps the Enfield Horror still lurks in the unseen shadows, just waiting to return again. Folks, I just want to take a brief pause right here to thank everybody for the comments and the reviews and for reaching out, and to just thank you guys every week who join me here on the podcast, and the new people who are joining me either on YouTube or watching me on Spotify. Thank you. I understand there are plenty of places to get this kind of content, and I just appreciate you guys choosing to hang out with me. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on that matter. But again, thank you all so much. I appreciate every last one of you. And let's keep going with the Enfield monster. Don't know why I did double guns. It's a weird thing. Stop it, Chris. Now, all the drama that had surrounded the Enfield monster began in April of '73 with Henry McDaniel. But there was more drama and more intrigue with other people, some of the people who came to visit after hearing Henry's story. And this took place shortly after in May. And underneath an indigo sky of an early dawn on Sunday, May 6th, a man named Rick Rainbow, a name that is synonymous with the radio waves of Kokomo, Indiana's WWKI station, found himself in an unusual expedition. And he wasn't alone on this peculiar quest. He was accompanied by 3 of his closest friends. And no, they weren't searching for the latest music trends or scouting for new radio talent. Instead, they were diving into the heart of the uncharted wilderness that sprawled near an abandoned house. This desolate structure was rumored to be within a stone's throw from Henry McDaniel's residence. The quartet navigated through the thorny undergrowth and the towering trees around the home, their hearts pounding and echoing with a mix of anticipation and fear. Suddenly, their eyes locked onto something that defied explanation. A figure emerged from the dense foliage. It was approximately 5.5 feet tall, but it was hunched over. Its skin was a chalky shade of gray, almost blending into the gloomy backdrop of the woods. They said it moved like nothing they've ever seen before. It was fast, yet staggeringly unnatural in its gait. Now, Rick and his buddies saw this thing, and before any of them could react or really even comprehend what they were witnessing, it darted off at breakneck speeds back into the darkness, just beyond their sightline. As quickly as it had appeared in front of them, it vanished, leaving behind nothing. But Rick had been prepared for such an encounter. With quick thinking, he managed to capture something extraordinary on his tape recorder. A chilling shriek that echoed through the silent woods, as if announcing its departure. The sound was eerie and otherworldly, and as the sun began to set, casting shadows across the quaint town of Enfield, world-renowned cryptozoologist Loren Coleman stepped into the mystery that had captured the attention of the world. With a reputation for exploring the unknown, he was drawn to this particular case like a moth to the flame. The creature, elusive and mysterious, had been sighted by several locals, its eerie cries echoing through the night, sending shivers down people's backs. However, as time passed, and despite Loren's persistent investigations, public interest in this strange occurrence gradually began to wane. The once bustling town square that was filled with whispers and gazes was now just another mundane scene of everyday life. The sightings dwindled until they ceased entirely. It seemed as though the creature had just vanished into thin air. Loren found himself standing before a sea of microphones one afternoon under an overcast sky. The man's eyes were tired. His mind was buzzing with all the unanswered questions. He said, "I journeyed to Enfield." His voice steady yet filled with an undertone of bewilderment. He recalled vividly how he'd interviewed each witness, listening intently to their accounts as they told him their encounters with what was known as the Enfield Monster. He remembered examining closely at the side of the house that bore the marks of damage allegedly caused by this mysterious creature. But there was one late-night memory that stood out in particular. As he patrolled around the vicinity where most of the sightings occurred, he heard something unearthly. A screech that echoed in the silent night. It was like anything he'd ever heard before, almost banshee-like in its intensity. He said, "I just walked away confused." His eyes glazed over slightly as if lost in the thought about this mystery, the mystery that would continue to haunt him even after all these years. But despite it all, one thing has remained certain. The Enfield Monster hadn't been seen since, leaving behind nothing but a trail of questions and a town that is really filled with just unforgettable memories of what happened. Now, the story of the Enfield Monster I don't want to say it didn't stop there, because it did. But it didn't begin there. These stories of these cryptids often span throughout forever, just like most folklore that kind of passed down through generations. I mean, the Jersey Devil story started way back when, and there's reports of it up until a few years ago, literally a rock's throw from my house. But if you're looking for more information of more recent sightings of the Enfield Horror, you're gonna come up empty-handed. But that's if you're looking forward. Maybe try instead to look back. In the early 1940s, specifically between the years of 41 and 42, an eerie series of events occurred in the quaint and somewhat secluded village of Mount Vernon. This tiny hamlet is nestled in a picturesque landscape and ironically situated less than 40 miles from Enfield. And it became the epicenter of a mystery that continues to baffle people up until today. The villagers began reporting sightings of a creature, and not just any creature. It was described as a leaping beast with the uncanny ability to bound across vast distances with ease. Sound familiar? The mere sight of it sent shivers down their backs and sparked whispers of fear among all the locals. But it wasn't just its appearance or movement that was terrifying, it was its actions too. This entity seemed to just love violence, and it left behind a trail of devastation. Numerous animals were found lifeless, their bodies bearing signs of brutal mutilation. These horrific incidents weren't isolated either. They formed a pattern that held the village in a grip of terror. This leaping beast wasn't merely an apparition. It was an insidious predator that seemed to relish its reign of terror over this small community. The townsfolk were left trembling in fear, their peaceful existence shattered by this monstrous invader from beyond their understanding. To this day, no one really knows what exactly this leaping beast was or why it targeted Mount Vernon during these years. The only certainty is that those dark days etched deep scars into the collective memory of the village, turning their once idyllic home into a place synonymous with unexplained horror. Those living in the vicinity had taken to referring to this mysterious creature as the Mount Vernon monster. They painted an image of it that was curiously simian, a somewhat distorted reflection of a baboon. Its physique bore uncanny resemblances, from its hunched back to its elongated snout. Yet what truly set the creature apart from any known primate was its extraordinary leaping ability. Witnesses claimed it could effortlessly spring anywhere between 20 and 40 feet in a single jump. But the comparisons didn't really stop at baboons. Many people drew parallels between this mysterious entity and another cryptid legend, the devil monkey. The similarities were striking. Both creatures were described as being eerily humanoid yet animalistic, and their behaviors defied conventional wildlife habits. However, there were whispers among some locals that perhaps this wasn't a new creature at all. Could this have been maybe something that has been around for a long time? Could the Enfield monster be taking a different form, or is this the origin of the Enfield monster? There were whispers among some locals that perhaps this wasn't a new creature at all. There were stories of this creature that have haunted the Mount Vernon area for generations, and then it simply stopped. Could it have moved on? Moved on to Enfield, perhaps? Maybe it relocated, seeking fresh terrorizing grounds. Maybe it plans to relocate again. My thoughts on this are, one thing is for certain. If you ever find yourself wandering near Mount Vernon after dark, or in Enfield, Illinois, and you hear an odd rustling followed by what sounds like a leap, well, my friends, you might be in trouble. You may have just met our monster. Folks, I want to thank you all so much for joining me. I'm Christopher Feinstein, and this is Haunted American History.